She was worth $40 billion. He had exactly $12.50 in his pocket. When Vivian Sterling, the ice queen of Wall Street, walked into Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant, she expected a $500 steak and silence. What she didn't expect was to see a ghost from her past, a single father begging for a glass of water for his daughter. Most billionaires would call security. Some might leave a tip. But what Vivian did next didn't just break protocol. It broke the internet, destroyed a frantic cover-up, and changed the definition of power forever. You think you know where this is going. You don't. This is the story of the dinner that cost a fortune and the man who refused to be bought. The air inside l'Orangerie didn't smell like food. It smelled like old money and silent judgment. It was the kind of silence that cost $300 a minute to experience. Vivian Sterling sat at the center table, table 1, like a monarch on a velvet throne. At 42, she was the CEO of Sterling Heart, a biotech conglomerate that had essentially monopolized the market on synthetic organ manufacturing. She was sharp, angular, and terrifyingly beautiful, wearing a charcoal blazer that cost more than the average American's car. Her eyes were the color of cold steel, and right now they were fixed on her 10-year-old son, Leo. Leo was staring at his iPad, watching a streamer scream about Minecraft. He was wearing headphones. "Leo," Vivian said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried a frequency that usually made board members sweat. "Headphones off." Leo sighed a heavy, dramatic exhale that only the children of the ultra-wealthy seemed to master. He pulled the headphones down around his neck. "I wasn't listening to anything, Mom. I was just pausing it." "We are at dinner," Vivian said, picking up her crystal goblet of sparkling water. "We converse, that is what people do. I haven't seen you since Tuesday." "It's Friday," Leo muttered. "And you saw me Tuesday on FaceTime, with your assistant holding the phone." Vivian stiffened. The guilt was a pinprick easily ignored like a mosquito bite. "I was closing the merger with O'Connell Farmer. It secures your future, Leo. Everything I do is for you." "Can I get the Wagyu?" Leo asked, ignoring her sentiment entirely. "You can have whatever you want," Vivian said, signaling the sommelier with a single raised finger. "That is the point of being a Sterling." The waiter, a man named Henri, who had served presidents and royalty, glided over. "Madame Sterling, the usual, the 82 Bordeaux Henri, and the boy will have the A5 Wagyu, medium rare. If it's overcooked, send it back before it touches the table." "Of course, madame." As Henri retreated, Vivian looked around the room. L'Orangerie was a fortress against the reality of New York City. Outside it was sleeting, a miserable grey slush piling up on Fifth Avenue. Inside it was warm amber light and soft jazz. Here there was no poverty, no struggle, no failure. Vivian had spent 20 years building walls this high. She had clawed her way up from a trailer park in Ohio, erasing her accent, her past, and her mercy. She believed that weakness was a disease, and poverty was the primary symptom. "Mom," Leo said, kicking his legs under the table. "Dad called." Vivian's hand froze on the stem of her glass. "Richard. What did he want?" "He wants to take me to Aspen for Christmas." "Richard is currently under investigation by the SEC," Vivian said coldly. "He isn't taking you anywhere, and if he calls again, you tell him to speak to my lawyers." "He says you're trying to erase him," Leo said. He was only 10, but he had the weary eyes of a 40-year-old divorcee. "I am trying to protect you from incompetence," Vivian snapped. Then she softened slightly. Leo, listen to me. In this world there are wolves and there are sheep. Your father is a sheep who thinks he's a wolf. That is dangerous. I am the shepherd. I keep the wolves away. I don't need a shepherd, Leo mumbled, looking back at his iPad. I need a mom who doesn't schedule dinner in Outlook. Vivian felt a flash of anger, but she swallowed it with a sip of the wine that had just appeared. She opened her mouth to lecture him on gratitude, but a commotion at the front of the restaurant stopped her. It was a sound that didn't belong in l'orangerie. It was the sound of a raised voice, desperate cracking and distinctly unpolished. I don't want a table, I just need to use the restroom. Please, she's sick. Vivian turned her head. The entire restaurant went silent. Forks hovered halfway to mouths. Standing at the host stand was a man who looked like he had walked out of a different century, or at least a different tax bracket. He was wearing a soaked, oversized canvas jacket that was dark with rain. His jeans were frayed at the hems, dragging over wet, mud-stained work boots. But it was what he was holding that caught Vivian's eye. He was clutching a little girl, maybe 6 years old, wrapped in a blanket that looked like it had been pulled from a car trunk. Her face was flushed red, her eyes glassy. "Sir, you cannot be in here." The maitre d', a typically composed man named Charles, was saying, his voice rising an octave. "This is a private establishment. There is a Starbucks 2 blocks down." 2 blocks is too far, the man pleaded. He was shaking water dripping from his messy brown hair onto the pristine marble floor. "She threw up in the cab the driver kicked us out. It's freezing out there. Just let me clean her up. 5 minutes. Please." "Security," Charles barked. Vivian watched the scene with a mixture of disgust and curiosity. It was like watching a nature documentary. The prey had wandered into the predator's den. "Mom, look," Leo whispered. He had put his iPad down. "That girl is crying." "It's not our business, Leo," Vivian said, turning back to her menu. "Eat your bread. But she's sick. People get sick, Leo. That is why we have hospitals. That man is trespassing." "Please." The man's voice cracked, and for the first time he turned his face toward the dining room, scanning the sea of uncaring faces for an ounce of sympathy. Vivian looked up. Their eyes locked across the room. The fork dropped from her hand, clattering loudly against the fine china. The noise rang out like a gunshot in the silent room. Vivian didn't blink. She couldn't breathe. The years peeled away the billions of dollars, the biotech empire, the penthouse on Park Avenue, the icy armor she had welded to her soul. It all evaporated in a single second. She knew those eyes. They were warmer then, full of laughter and bad poetry, and promises made on the hood of a rusted pickup truck. It was Caleb. Caleb Ross, the man who was supposed to be dead. The security guard, a burly man in a suit that was too tight around the shoulders, had grabbed Caleb by the arm. "Let's go, pal. Don't make this ugly." "I'm not leaving until she's warm," Caleb shouted, struggling. He wasn't a small man, but he looked gaunt, hollowed out by years of something harder than just work. The little girl, Maya, began to wail, a high, thin sound that grated on the nerves of the hedge fund managers and socialites nearby. "Get him out," a man at table 4 shouted. "I'm trying to eat a ceviche here." Vivian stood up. Her chair scraped back with a violence that made Leo jump. "Mom!" Vivian didn't answer. She walked toward the entrance. She didn't walk like a woman going to help. She walked like a general marching toward the front lines. Her heels clicked a sharp, deadly rhythm on the floor. "Let him go," Vivian said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it stopped the security guard instantly. He looked up, saw it was Vivian Sterling, the woman who owned the building the restaurant rented from, and immediately released Caleb's arm. "Miss Sterling," Charles, the maitre d', stammered, wiping sweat from his brow. "I apologize deeply. This vagrant barged in. We are removing him immediately. I said." Vivian repeated, her eyes locked on Caleb's stunned face. "Let him go." Caleb straightened his jacket, pulling the little girl closer to his chest. He looked at Vivian, and for a moment there was no recognition, just confusion. He saw a billionaire in Chanel, not the girl named Vivi who used to wear thrift store flannels. "Thank you, ma'am," Caleb muttered, his voice rough. "I just need water, and a bathroom. We aren't looking for trouble." "You won't find water in the bathroom," Vivian said. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, so hard she thought it might crack them. "Charles, set table 2. Charles blinked. "Table 2, but Miss Sterling, that is reserved for the mayor at 8 o'clock. The mayor can wait, or he can eat at the Starbucks 2 blocks down," Vivian said. "Set the table, now." She turned to Caleb. "You're dining with us?" Caleb took a step back, his boots squelching. "Look, lady, I don't have money for this. I can't pay for— It's on the house," Vivian said. She finally looked at the little girl. Maya had Caleb's nose, but her eyes were dark, almost black. "She needs food. She needs warmth. Sit down." Caleb hesitated. His pride was clearly warring with his desperation. He looked at his shivering daughter, then at the warmth of the dining room. The father in him won. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay. Thank you." Vivian turned on her heel and walked back to her table. She sat down, her hands trembling beneath the tablecloth. "Mum." Leo stared at her wide-eyed. "Who is that?" "Someone I used to know," Vivian said, picking up her wine glass and draining half of it in one swallow. "A very long time ago." Caleb and Maya were ushered to the table right next to theirs. The contrast was jarring. Leo was in a Ralph Lauren polo. Maya was in a faded pink hoodie with a stain on the front. Caleb sat gingerly, afraid to touch the tablecloth. The waiter, Henri, approached Caleb's table with visible disdain. He didn't offer a menu. He just stood there, waiting. "Henri," Vivian said sharply. "Yes, madame." "Bring the gentleman the menu, and bring the girl a hot chocolate, real chocolate, not the powder, and bring a warm towel." "Right away." Caleb looked across the small gap between their tables. He squinted at Vivian. The lighting was dim, and 20 years does a lot to a person. Vivian had had surgery, a nose job, veneers, fillers. She was a polished diamond now. Back then, she had been a rough piece of coal. "I appreciate this," Caleb said, his voice low. "I really do. I'm Caleb." "I know," Vivian said. She couldn't help it. Caleb froze. He leaned forward. "Have we met?" Vivian looked at Leo, then back at Caleb. "Eat your dinner, Caleb. We can talk after." But the tension in the room was palpable. The other diners were whispering. iPhones were out surreptitiously recording. The billionaire and the beggar. It was viral content gold. As the food arrived, a steaming bowl of lobster bisque for Maya and a steak for Caleb. Vivian watched him eat. He ate quickly, with a hunger that spoke of missed meals. He cut the meat into tiny pieces and fed them to his daughter first. "Is it good, baby?" he asked Maya softly. "It's yummy, Daddy," Maya whispered. "Are we in a castle?" "Something like that." Caleb smiled. It was a sad, broken smile that tore at Vivian's heart. "So," Vivian said, unable to maintain the silence. What happened, Caleb? Caleb looked up, wiping his mouth with the linen napkin. Life happened, I guess. The plant closed down in Ohio. Came here looking for work in construction. Got hurt on a job site. No insurance. You know how it goes. Ohio, Vivian repeated. Dayton. Caleb dropped his fork. How did you know I'm from Dayton? Vivian leaned forward into the light. Because, Caleb, you took me to my senior prom in a borrowed Ford Taurus in Dayton. Caleb stared. He squinted. He tilted his head. And then the realization hit him like a physical blow. His face went pale beneath the grime. Vivi, he whispered. Vivi Miller. Vivian Sterling now, she corrected. My God, Caleb breathed. He looked around the opulent restaurant, then back at her. You did it. You always said you would. You said you'd own the world one day. I own a significant portion of it. Yes, Vivian said. And you? Caleb looked at Leo. This is your son, Leo, Vivian said. Caleb's eyes lingered on Leo for a second too long. A strange, unreadable expression crossed his face. He looks healthy. That's good. That's really good. Why wouldn't he be healthy? Vivian asked, defensive. No reason, Caleb said quickly. Just, kids get sick. My Maya, she has it rough. Immune system isn't what it should be. Why didn't you call me? Vivian asked. The question had been burning in her throat for 2 decades. When I left for college, when I changed my number, you could have found me. I'm on the cover of Forbes, Caleb. You knew where I was. Caleb laughed, a bitter, dry sound. Call you Vivi, look at you. Look at me. What was I gonna say? Hey, remember the guy you dumped because he was holding you back? Can I borrow $1,000? I didn't dump you because you were holding me back. Vivian lied. You did, Caleb said gently. And you were right. You were destined for this. I was destined for this. He gestured to his wet clothes. But you're a genius, Caleb. Vivian said, her voice dropping to a hush. The code you wrote back in high school. The algorithm for predictive modeling. You were smarter than me. You were supposed to be the one at MIT. Caleb went silent. He looked down at his plate. I sold it. Vivian felt a chill. You sold what? The code, the Miller-Ross algorithm. I sold my half of the rights. To who? To some shell company about 15 years ago. Needed the money for family stuff. My mom got sick. Vivian's blood ran cold. Sterling Hart, her company, was built entirely on a foundational algorithm she had patented 15 years ago. An algorithm she claimed sole credit for. An algorithm she had bought from an anonymous seller through a third party to avoid legal disputes. She had bought Caleb's future for pennies while he was desperate without him ever knowing she was the buyer. She had become a billionaire using his brain. How much did you sell it for? Vivian asked, her voice trembling. $50,000. Caleb shrugged. It seemed like a fortune at the time. Kept Mom in hospice for 6 months, $50,000. Vivian's company was worth $40 billion. She felt sick. The Wagyu beef in her stomach turned to lead. She looked at Leo sitting there with his iPad, the heir to a fortune stolen from the man sitting 3 feet away in wet jeans. Caleb, Vivian started. I need to tell you something. But before she could speak, the doors of the restaurant burst open again. This time, it wasn't a beggar. It was the police. 2 NYPD officers marched in, followed by a short, frantic man in a cheap suit, the manager of the construction site Caleb had mentioned. That's him, the manager shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Caleb. That's the guy. He stole the copper wiring from the site. He's a thief." The dining room gasped. Caleb stood up, knocking his chair over. "I didn't steal anything. I went back to get my tools. You fired me without paying me." "You're under arrest," one of the officers said, reaching for his handcuffs. Maya started screaming. "Daddy! Daddy!" Vivian watched the scene unfold. The man who gave her the world was about to be dragged away in handcuffs in front of her son. She had two choices: stay silent, keep her reputation, and let the past rot in a cell, or do the unbelievable. Vivian Sterling stood up. The restaurant was dead silent. The only sound was the heavy rhythmic thrum of the rain against the glass and the soft whimper of Maya clinging to her father's leg. Officer Miller, the taller of the two policemen, looked at Vivian. He recognized her instantly. Everyone in New York recognized Vivian Sterling. She was on the news every time the stock market sneezed. "Miss Sterling," the officer said, his tone shifting from aggression to deference. "This doesn't concern you. This man is a suspect in a theft at the Hudson Yards site." "It concerns me," Vivian said, her voice cutting through the room like a diamond cutter. "Because he is my guest." The construction manager, a sweating man named Gorski, whose cheap cologne was suddenly overpowering the smell of truffle oil, stepped forward. "Guest lady, this guy is a bum. He ripped $200 worth of copper wire out of the walls." $200, Vivian repeated flatly. She didn't look at Gorski. She looked at Caleb. His eyes were squeezed shut, his shame radiating off him in waves. He was a man who had once solved differential equations for fun, now being handcuffed for the price of a mid-range bottle of wine. Vivian reached into her purse, a Birkin bag that cost more than Gorski made in a year, and pulled out a checkbook. She didn't carry cash. Cash was for commoners. "Release him," she commanded. "We can't just release him." "Miss Sterling," the officer said nervously. "Charges have been pressed." Vivian uncapped a gold fountain pen. She scribbled on the check, ripped it out, and held it between her two manicured fingers. She didn't hand it to the officer. She extended it toward Gorski. "Here is a check for $10,000, Vivian said. "That covers the copper. It covers the emotional distress of your site management. And it covers a severance package for Mr. Ross, who is resigning effectively immediately." Gorski's eyes bulged. He looked at the check, then at the police, then back at the check. Greed fought with anger, and greed won in a landslide. Well, if restitution is paid," Gorski stammered, reaching for the paper. "Ah." Vivian pulled the check back an inch. "One condition. You will apologize to his daughter. You scared her." Gorski's face turned a mottled purple. "I'm not apologizing to a $10,000, Vivian whispered. "Or I can call my legal team and we can discuss the undocumented workers you have on the night shift at the Hudson Yards project. Yes, I know about that. I sit on the city zoning board, Mr. Gorski. I can have your site shut down by morning." The blood drained from Gorski's face. He turned to Maya, who was burying her face in Caleb's wet coat. "I'm sorry, kid," Gorski muttered. "My bad." "Take the check and get out," Vivian said, finally releasing the paper. Gorski grabbed it and practically ran out the door. The police, sensing the power dynamic, had shifted tectonically. Uncuffed Caleb. "We're good here, Ms. Sterling," Officer Miller said, tipping his cap. They left. The restaurant remained silent. Every eye was on the billionaire and the man in the dirty work boots. "Sit down, Caleb," Vivian said, her voice trembling slightly, now that the adrenaline was fading. "I can't," Caleb whispered. He was rubbing his wrists where the metal had pinched him. I can't stay here, Vivi. Not like this. You have nowhere to go, Vivian stated. It wasn't a question. You said the shelter was full. I'll figure it out. I always do. No, you don't, Vivian said, her eyes flashing. If you figured it out, you wouldn't be stealing copper, Caleb. You are the smartest man I ever knew. What happened to you? You happened to me, Caleb snapped. The shout echoed. Leo, who had been watching the entire exchange with his mouth open, looked from his mother to the strange man. Vivian flinched. She took a deep breath. Henri, pack the rest of the food to go. Get the car around. She turned to Caleb. You aren't staying here. You're coming with me. I'm not going to your mansion, Caleb said, his pride flaring up one last time. Look at your daughter, Caleb, Vivian said softly. Caleb looked down. Maya was shivering violently now, her skin pale and clammy. She looked fragile, like a porcelain doll that had been dropped too many times. She needs a warm bath and a real bed, Vivian said. Swallow your pride. For her. Caleb's shoulders slumped. He was defeated. Okay. As they walked out of l'Orangerie, the paparazzi were already waiting. The flashbulbs popped like lightning, illuminating the strange quartet. The Ice Queen, the heir, the pauper, and the sick girl. Vivian put her hand up to block the cameras, but she made sure her other hand was guiding Maya. For the first time in 10 years, Vivian Sterling didn't care about the stock price. She cared about the fact that the man walking beside her was wearing wet boots, and it was entirely her fault. The ride to the penthouse was silent. Vivian's driver, a stoic ex-Marine named Marcus, kept glancing in the rearview mirror, assessing the threat level of the muddy man sitting on the Italian leather seats. Leo broke the silence. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small, plush creeper from Minecraft. He held it out to Maya. You can hold him, Leo said awkwardly. He explodes, but he's soft. Maya looked at the toy, then at Leo. A small smile ghosted across her lips. She took it. Thank you. Caleb looked at Leo and then at Vivian. He's a good kid, Vivi. You did good. He's lonely, Vivian said, staring out the window at the blurred city lights. He has everything, and he has nothing. When they arrived at the Sterling Tower, the doorman's jaw practically hit the floor, but he held the door open without a word. They took the private elevator to the 91st floor. The penthouse was a sprawling masterpiece of glass and steel overlooking Central Park. It was breathtaking, but cold. There were no family photos on the walls, only abstract art that cost millions. Guest room is down the hall to the right, Vivian instructed. There's a bathroom en suite. I'll have the staff bring up some of Leo's old clothes for you, Caleb. They might be a bit short, but they're dry. And for Maya? Caleb asked. I don't have girls' clothes, Vivian realized. She turned to her housekeeper, Maria, who had appeared like magic. Maria, go to my closet. Get the cashmere sweaters. The small ones. They will work as dresses for the girl. And order a pediatric kit from the pharmacy. While Caleb got Maya settled and bathed, Vivian poured herself a scotch. Her hands were shaking. She stood on the balcony looking down at the city that worshipped her. Nice view, a voice said behind her. It was Caleb. He was wearing a pair of grey sweatpants and a black t-shirt that belonged to Vivian's personal trainer, who sometimes left clothes there. He looked cleaner, but older. The lines around his eyes were deep canyons of stress. It costs a lot to look down on everyone, Vivian said, not turning around. Is that what you do? Caleb asked, stepping beside her. Look down on us. I built this company from nothing, Caleb. I didn't have a trust fund. No, Caleb said quietly. You had an algorithm. Vivian froze. The wind whipped her hair across her face. We need to talk about that. Do we? Caleb leaned against the glass railing. I Googled you, Vivi, years ago. When Sterling Hart went public, I saw the patent filing. Predictive modeling for biological synthesis. It looked familiar. It looked like the code I wrote on a napkin at Denny's in 1999. I improved it, Vivian said defensively. You wrote the skeleton, I built the body. You stole the skeleton, Caleb corrected. He wasn't angry. He sounded tired. I sold those rights to a shell company called Blue Horizon. I found out later Blue Horizon is a subsidiary of your holding company. I had to. Vivian turned to him, her eyes pleading. You didn't have the vision, Caleb. You wanted to use the code to predict what weather patterns? Traffic. I saw what it could do for medicine, for organs. I saved lives with that code. You made billions with that code, Caleb said, and you let me think I was selling it to a stranger for rent money. I was afraid, Vivian whispered. I was afraid if I came to you directly, you wouldn't sell it. You would have wanted to be partners. And you were a mess back then, Caleb. You were drinking. You were gambling. I was grieving. Caleb shouted, his voice cracking. My mom was dying. I needed you, Vivi. And you left for New York and bought my brain for pennies on the dollar. The silence between them was heavy, filled with 20 years of secrets. I can pay you now, Vivian said. I can write you a check for $10 million right now. 50 million. Name it. Caleb laughed. It was a hollow sound. You think money fixes everything. You just bought off that foreman. You think you can buy off your conscience. It helps, Vivian said honestly. I don't want your money, Caleb said. I want to know why you never told me about him. Vivian stopped breathing. Who? Leo, Caleb said. He turned and looked through the glass doors. Leo was sitting on the floor in the living room, showing Maya something on his iPad. They looked like siblings. Leo is my son, Vivian said sharply. He's 10, Caleb said. We broke up 11 years ago. The math works, Vivi. I was seeing Richard right after we broke up. Vivian lied. She had practiced this lie for a decade. Leo is Richard's. Does Richard have blue eyes? Caleb asked. Because you have brown eyes, and I have blue eyes, and Leo, he has my eyes, Vivi. Vivian gripped her scotch glass so hard it threatened to shatter. He is Richard's son. Richard is on the birth certificate. Paper doesn't change biology, Caleb said. You stole my code. Did you steal my son too? How dare you? Vivian hissed. I raised him. I sat up with him when he had fevers. I went to the soccer games. Where were you? I didn't know he existed, Caleb roared. Inside, the kids looked up. Vivian lowered her voice instantly. Stop. You are upsetting them. Tell me the truth, Caleb begged. Just give me one thing that is real. Is he mine? Vivian looked at Caleb. She saw the man she had loved. She saw the poverty he lived in. And she saw the threat he posed to her carefully constructed empire. If it came out that the CEO of Sterling Hart had a secret child with a destitute laborer, the board would have a field day. But more than that, she was terrified of losing Leo's love. No, she said, looking him dead in the eye. He is not yours. Caleb held her gaze for a long moment. He was searching for the lie, scanning her face like he used to scan lines of code. Finally, he exhaled. Okay, he whispered. Okay. He didn't believe her. She knew he didn't. but he didn't have the money to fight her. "I'm going to check on Maya," Caleb said, pushing off the railing. He walked back inside a defeated man in a billionaire's castle. Vivian finished her scotch. She felt like she had won, but for some reason it felt exactly like losing. The screaming started at 3 a.m. It wasn't a nightmare scream. It was a scream of physical agony. Vivian woke up instantly. She threw on a silk robe and ran down the hallway. She found Caleb in the guest room, kneeling on the floor beside the bed. Maya was convulsing. "What's happening?" Vivian shouted, dropping to her knees. "It's a seizure." Caleb was crying, trying to hold Maya's head so she wouldn't hit the nightstand. She hasn't had one this bad in months. Her meds, the bag got wet in the rain. They must have dissolved. Maya's face was turning blue. She was foaming at the mouth. "Call 911, Caleb screamed. "No," Vivian said, her executive brain taking over. "Ambulance takes 10 minutes. My helicopter is on the roof. We can be at Lenox Hill in 4. She grabbed the house phone. "Marcus, prep the chopper. Now call Dr. Aris at Lenox Hill. Tell him I'm coming in hot with a code blue pediatric." 5 minutes later, they were in the air. The city of New York was a grid of lights below them, indifferent to the tragedy unfolding in the sky. Caleb was holding Maya's oxygen mask, tears streaming down his face. Vivian was holding Maya's hand. It was tiny and cold. "She's going to be okay," Vivian said, though she didn't know that. "It's her kidneys," Caleb choked out over the roar of the rotors. "It's genetic, focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, but it's aggressive. The doctors said. They said she needs a transplant, but she has antibodies. She rejects everything. She's been on the waiting list for 3 years. Vivian felt a jolt of electricity go down her spine. Rejects everything. Sterling Hart, her company, had just developed a revolutionary new treatment project Chimera. It was a bio-printed organ scaffold that used the patient's own stem cells. 0 rejection rate. It was the holy grail of medicine. But it was in phase 1 trials. It was illegal to use on humans outside of the strictly controlled study group. Using it on a civilian, especially a child, would be a federal crime. It would destroy the company. It would send Vivian to prison. The helicopter touched down on the hospital roof. A team of doctors in white coats was waiting, led by Dr. Aris, the chief of surgery. They rushed Maya into the trauma bay. Caleb and Vivian were left standing in the sterile white hallway. Hours passed. The sun began to rise over the East River, casting a grey light into the hospital waiting room. Caleb was pacing, muttering prayers. Vivian was on her BlackBerry cancelling meetings. Dr. Aris came out. He looked grim. "Miss Sterling." He nodded to her, then turned to Caleb. "Mr. Ross." "Is she alive?" Caleb asked, his voice trembling. "She is stable for now," Dr. Aris said. "But her kidneys have shut down completely. Dialysis isn't working fast enough. Her body is in a cytokine storm. She is attacking the dialysis port." "So what do we do?" Caleb asked. "Transplant. I'll give her mine. Take my kidney." "We tested you while you were in the intake," Dr. Aris said gently. "You aren't a match, Mr. Ross, and we don't have time to wait for a donor. To be honest, she likely has less than 48 hours. Caleb made a sound like a wounded animal. He slid down the wall and put his head in his hands. Dr. Aris looked at Vivian. He knew. Everyone in the medical world knew what Sterling Hart was working on. "Vivian," Dr. Aris said, dropping the formalities. "There is one option." "No," Vivian said immediately. "We haven't passed FDA approval." "She is going to die, Vivian," Dr. Aris said. The chimera graft is in the freezer in your lab across town. We could have it here in 20 minutes. We take a biopsy of her tissue print the scaffold. We could have a functioning organ in 12 hours. It's illegal, Vivian said. Her voice was robotic. I would lose my license. The company's stock would tank. The SEC would bury me. Caleb looked up. He didn't understand the technical jargon, but he understood the tone. What are you talking about? You can save her. Vivian has a prototype, Dr. Aris said, looking at her significantly. But it is experimental. Do it, Caleb said, scrambling to his feet. Please, Vivi, do it. I can't, Vivian said, staring at the floor. Caleb, you don't understand. It's not just money. It's federal law. If I authorize this, thousands of people lose their jobs. The company goes under. My daughter is dying, Caleb screamed. He grabbed Vivian by the shoulders. You owe me. You stole my life. You stole my code. You owe me this. Security, a nurse called out from the station. Let go of me, Vivian whispered, tears finally spilling over. You said you were the shepherd, Caleb cried, shaking her. You said you keep the wolves away. Well, the wolf is here. Vivi, it's death, and you're the only one with a gun. Security guards rushed in and pulled Caleb off her. He didn't fight them. He just looked at her with eyes full of absolute hatred. If she dies, Caleb spat, I will spend the rest of my life burning your empire to the ground. I don't care if I have to do it with a matchstick. They dragged him away to the waiting room. Vivian stood alone in the hallway. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from the chairman of the board, Mr. Henderson. Text saw the video of the restaurant incident. Stock is down 4% in pre-market. We are calling an emergency meeting at noon. We need to discuss your position as CEO. Do not do anything rash. Vivian looked at the text. She looked at the door where Maya was dying. She thought about Leo sleeping safe in the penthouse. She thought about the $50,000 she paid for the code that made her a billionaire. She typed a reply to the chairman, Go to hell. Then she looked at Dr. Aris. Prep the OR, Vivian said. I'm making the call. The next 6 hours were a blur of sterile blue light and hushed urgency. Vivian Sterling, the woman who usually commanded boardrooms with a single raised eyebrow, was now standing guard outside Operating Room 4 like a sentinel. Inside, Dr. Aris and a team of the world's best bioengineers were breaking a dozen federal laws. They were printing a kidney. The Project Chimera bioprinter had been rushed over from Sterling Hart's labs in an armored van disguised as medical waste transport. Vivian had to bribe the driver, the night security at her own lab, and the loading dock manager at the hospital. The bribe tally was up to $250,000 in personal checks. Caleb sat on the floor of the waiting room, his head between his knees. He looked like a man praying to a god he hadn't spoken to in years. It's going to work, Vivian said, though her voice lacked its usual steel. She was pacing. How do you know? Caleb asked, looking up. His eyes were red-rimmed. Because the algorithm works, Vivian said. I built the company on it. It predicts cellular rejection with 99.9% accuracy. And since the source code came from you, it has to work for her. It's poetic justice, isn't it? Caleb let out a shaky breath. If she lives, I don't care about the money, Vivi. I don't care about the theft. Just let her live. Vivian stopped pacing. She looked at the elevator doors. They pinged. But it wasn't a doctor. 3 men in dark suits stepped out. They didn't look like doctors. They looked like sharks in Italian wool. Leading them was Marcus Thorne, the chief legal officer of Sterling Hart. Vivian stiffened. Thorne. Vivian. Thorne said, his voice smooth and venomous. You need to stop this procedure immediately. It's already underway, Vivian said, crossing her arms. You can't stop a surgery in the middle. We have an emergency injunction, Thorne said, holding up a paper. The board has voted. You are suspended effective immediately pending an investigation into gross misconduct and misappropriation of proprietary technology. Security is on its way to confiscate the Chimera unit. You want to unplug a machine keeping a 6-year-old girl alive? Vivian asked, her voice rising. That will look great on CNN, Thorne. We want to protect the shareholders from a federal indictment, Thorne snapped. If that girl dies, it's manslaughter. If she lives, it's unauthorized human experimentation. We are mitigating damage. Step aside. Thorne moved toward the double doors of the OR. Vivian didn't think. She acted. She stepped in front of the doors, blocking his path. You are not going in there. Get out of the way, Vivian, Thorne warned. Don't make me have you removed. Try it, she snarled. Thorne signaled the 2 large men behind him. They were private security contractors. They stepped forward, grabbing Vivian by the arms. Hey. It wasn't Vivian who shouted. It was Caleb. He launched himself from the floor. He wasn't a trained fighter, but he was a father, fueled by adrenaline and 20 years of repressed rage. He tackled one of the guards, sending them both crashing into a vending machine. The glass shattered, raining candy bars onto the linoleum. Don't you touch her, Caleb roared, swinging wildly. The other guard grabbed Caleb, pinning him easily. Thorne straightened his tie and looked at Vivian with pity. This is pathetic. You're ruining your life for a homeless man and a lost cause. No, Vivian said, shaking off the distracted guard. I'm redeeming it. She pulled out her phone. I'm live, Thorne. Thorne froze. Vivian was holding her phone up, streaming to Instagram Live. She had 4.5 million followers. I'm currently at Lenox Hill Hospital, Vivian said to the camera, her voice steady. I am Vivian Sterling. My company is trying to physically stop a life-saving surgery on a 6-year-old girl because they are worried about the stock price. This is Marcus Thorne, our chief legal officer. Say hi, Marcus. Thorne shielded his face, backing away. Turn that off. Are you insane? The world is watching Marcus, Vivian said, a cold smile playing on her lips. If you enter that room, you will be the most hated man in America within 10 minutes. Do you want to be the villain? Or do you want to walk away? Thorne looked at the phone, then at the OR doors. His phone started buzzing in his pocket, likely the PR department having a meltdown. You're finished, Vivian, Thorne hissed. You'll be in prison by the end of the week. He signaled his goons. They released Caleb, who slumped to the floor, panting. The suits retreated into the elevator. Vivian ended the stream. Her hand was shaking so badly, she almost dropped the phone. You crazy, Caleb wheezed, wiping blood from his lip. You crazy woman. I learned from the best, Vivian said, sliding down the wall to sit next to him. They sat there in silence among the broken glass and Snickers bars for an hour. Vivi, Caleb said softly. Earlier, when you said Leo wasn't mine. Vivian closed her eyes. The adrenaline was fading, leaving only the truth. He likes Minecraft, Vivian whispered, just like you liked building circuits. Caleb turned his head slowly. He has that little dimple on the left cheek when he smiles. Yes, Vivian said. Tears began to track through her perfect makeup. Richard has brown eyes, Caleb said. Yes, Vivian admitted. He's mine, Caleb choked out. He's yours, Vivian confessed. I found out 3 weeks after I arrived in New York. I was terrified, Caleb. I was a kid myself. I wanted the career. I wanted the power. I told myself you weren't ready, that you were a mess. But the truth is, I was selfish. I wanted him all to myself. Caleb didn't yell. He didn't rage. He just put his head back against the wall and let the tears fall. I have a son. You have a son, Vivian said, and he's wonderful, and he's lonely, and he needs his dad. Before Caleb could respond, the OR doors hissed open. Dr. Aris stepped out. He pulled off his surgical mask. He looked exhausted, sweat matting his hair. Vivian and Caleb stood up together. Well, Caleb whispered. Dr. Aris smiled. The graft took immediately. The algorithm was perfect. Her vitals are stabilizing. She's making urine. Kidneys are functioning. Caleb fell to his knees, sobbing. She's going to make it, Dr. Aris said. It's a medical miracle. Vivian let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for a decade. She looked at Caleb, then at the doctor. Good, Vivian said. Now call the police. I have a feeling they're waiting downstairs. The scandal was, as predicted, the biggest news story of the year. Billionaire, CEO arrested after illegal surgery, saves homeless child. It was on every screen in Times Square. Vivian Sterling was paraded out of the hospital in handcuffs, looking not like a criminal, but like a martyr. The public didn't care about FDA regulations or stock prices. They saw a mother figure saving a dying girl. The narrative shifted overnight. She wasn't the Ice Queen anymore. She was the Angel of Lenox Hill. Vivian spent 24 hours in a holding cell before her lawyers bailed her out. When she walked out of the precinct, the crowd was massive. Supporters held signs, "Save Maya, free Vivian, people over profits." But Vivian didn't stop for the cameras. She got into her car and went straight to the penthouse. Inside, the atmosphere was different. It wasn't cold anymore. Leo was sitting on the couch. Next to him, looking clean and shaved, was Caleb. Vivian stopped in the doorway. She was no longer the CEO. She was just a woman in a wrinkled blazer. "Mum," Leo jumped up and ran to her. "Are you okay? I saw you on TV. They said you're a hero." Vivian hugged her son, burying her face in his hair. "I'm okay, Leo. I'm okay." She looked over Leo's shoulder at Caleb. "How is she?" Vivian asked. "She's awake." Caleb smiled. She asked for grape juice. Dr. Aris says she can come home in a week. "Home," Vivian repeated. "Where is that going to be?" "Well." Caleb scratched the back of his neck. "I was thinking, maybe I need to stay in New York. I hear there's a job opening." "Oh." Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Yeah. Seems the CTO of Sterling Heart just resigned. Something about a hostile takeover." Vivian smirked. During her time in the holding cell, she hadn't just been sitting there. She had instructed her personal legal team to execute a contingency plan. She had officially acknowledged Caleb Ross as the original author of the source code. This legally invalidated the company's ownership of their core IP unless they negotiated with Caleb. Basically, Caleb now owned the leverage. The board couldn't fire Vivian because Caleb, the new IP holder, refused to license the technology to anyone but her. "I think you're qualified," Vivian said. "But the dress code is strict. No wet boots." "I can manage that," Caleb said. Then his expression turned serious. "Leo knows." Vivian froze. She looked down at her son. Leo looked up at her, his eyes shining blue eyes just like Caleb's. "Dad told me about the code. And about everything. Are you mad? Vivian asked, terrified. Mom, Leo said, rolling his eyes. I have a billionaire mom and a genius dad who hacked the medical system. Why would I be mad? That's awesome. Vivian laughed. It was a genuine laugh bubbling up from her chest. 6 months later. The restaurant L'Orangerie was busy as usual. At table 1, the center table sat a family of 4. Vivienne was there looking less angular, her hair softer. Caleb sat next to her, wearing a suit that fit perfectly, though he had loosened the tie. Leo was there, no iPad in sight, talking animatedly, and next to Leo sat Maya. She was wearing a bright yellow dress and looked the picture of health, her cheeks rosy. Henri the waiter approached with a bottle of wine. The usual Madame Sterling. Actually, Henri, Vivienne said, looking at Caleb. We're celebrating tonight. What is the occasion? Henri asked. FDA approval, Caleb said, clinking his glass against Vivienne's. Project Chimera is legal as of this morning. No more secrets. And, Leo added, I got an A on my math test. Dad helped me. Wonderful, Henri said. Shall I bring the Wagyu? Vivienne looked at the menu. Then she looked at the family she had almost lost, and the man she had almost destroyed. She thought about the $12.50 Caleb had in his pocket that night. You know what, Henri? Vivienne said, closing the menu. No. She stood up. Come on, guys. Where are we going? Maya asked, hopping off her chair. There's a burger place 2 blocks down, Vivienne said, taking Caleb's hand. I hear they have great milkshakes, and I think it's time we remember what real food tastes like. They walked out of the exclusive restaurant, leaving the silence and the judgment behind. As they stepped onto the rainy New York street, Vivian Sterling didn't look like a billionaire. She looked like something much richer. She looked happy. And that is how the Ice Queen melted. Vivian Sterling risked a $40 billion empire to save one little girl, and in doing so she found the family she thought she had lost forever. It turns out the most expensive thing in the world isn't a penthouse or a company. It's a second chance. What do you think? If you were in Vivian's shoes, would you have risked prison to save Maya? Or would you have protected the company? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. It helps us create more stories like this. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a twist. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.